Hello, my name is Father Tom Santa. I'm a Redemptorist, the director of Scrupulous Anonymous, and also your host with Managing Scrupulosity. Today I'm with you to spend a few minutes talking about a specific subject. And what we're going to be talking about today is understanding that scrupulosity is a disorder. Because one of the single biggest obstacles in healing when one is faced with scrupulosity is your personal understanding of what you're dealing with. I cannot begin to tell you how many times I've listened to people talk about their scrupulosity, and they've said with all sincerity that it is a cross given to them by Jesus. Still others have other explanations, all of which are manifestly false. Scrupulosity is a disorder. It is rightly categorized as a disorder by medical doctors and psychologists and recognized by the Church as an example of diminished capacity. It is a mental disorder that wreaks havoc with a person's ability to make a decision about specific content that's important to them. It's essential to understand and then to accept that OCD scrupulosity is a disorder. It's essential because when you realize that what you're suffering from is primarily a mental disorder that uses the language of spirituality, you will then be encouraged to apply the essential medical treatment that is required to manage your pain. Gritting your teeth or white-knuckling it through life because you believe that Jesus wants you to suffer is counterproductive. Looking to someone to expel the demons from your life is also not helpful. Embracing good, solid, well-thought-out, prescribed medical application is what is required. Correctly identifying what it is and then take the necessary steps to engage it in your healing process. This acceptance does not eliminate the truth that there is a spiritual component to the suffering that you are experiencing with your scrupulosity. Your suffering, as you struggle to express to people who are trying to help you, has assumed a religious vocabulary. It is masquerading as a spiritual issue rather than a mental health issue. This is the cruelty of the scrupulous condition. It wraps itself in a spiritual concept to enable what is truly desires: anxiety, depression, shame, and eventually isolation from all you love, all you care about, and all the people who love you. Scrupulosity in particular is very effective in using big words to generate the anxiety that it thrives on. And unfortunately, religion can be perceived as a system that is filled with big words that are complicated and scary. For example, normal human sexual feelings are quickly identified as lust. Questions that are essential for spiritual growth are miscategorized as blasphemy. Normal human conversation about your life and what you did that day and about relationships becomes calumny. And of course, any deviation from what is perceived as the norm is prime for worry and anxiety, particularly about validity and invalidity. The need to engage in imagined restitution for what a person is convinced they must certainly be responsible for can be ruinous. When a scrupulous person effectively mines the arena of sin that they are convinced that they are mired in and that they're engaged in and that they've committed, the path to omission becomes wide open. Not only do they imagine they've committed sins, they imagine that they've not done enough and there must be some sin in that. Sins of omission are never ending. and easily open to exaggeration, misunderstanding, and employ a standard that is impossible to reach. A virtual playground for the scrupulous condition. Even when a person with scrupulosity can acknowledge and accept each of the points that I've just made, the struggle's not over. The trump card that scrupulosity holds and plays is that even if you have everything in order, and even if you do everything as correctly as you can imagine, you are not yet good enough. Why would you want to rest from paying attention to every single detail? Why would you ever want to risk to get better? Because what happens if you're wrong? What happens if the risk that you take to get healthy somehow is displeasing to God? It's very, very hard to manage. It's very, very hard to face it. But manage it and face it you must. Everything that the scrupulous mind generates is a lie. I cannot repeat that enough. Everything that the scrupulous mind generates is a lie. There may be a kernel of truth in what it proposes, but the kernel is effectively minimalized and the false components are exaggerated. For example, if you engage in a compulsion or some other kind of ritual action, you will feel better. That's the promise of your scrupulous condition. That's the kernel of truth. But what your scrupulosity doesn't tell you is that when you feel the relief, it's not long-lasting, and you will not find any real peace. In fact, what happens when you engage in a scrupulous compulsion is that you guarantee that the next obsessive action or thought will begin with the intensity that this one ended on. In other words, scrupulosity is progressive. It never resets to zero. It just gets more and more intense in small little increments so that you don't notice it, but nonetheless, it stealthily strengthens. In the 1963 movie War Games, which starred Matthew Broderick and Ali Sheedy, among other fine actors, there's a scene at the end of the movie that makes a point that is important for this discussion. A massive and powerful computer, which is actually the center character of the movie, generates a huge amount of energy, questions, strategy, everything it needs to solve a problem. Each answer generated by the computer, although promising and somewhat convincing, leads nowhere. It leads only to chaos. Just when you think it cannot get any more tense and that destruction is imminent, all of a sudden the computer stops and says, "Strange game. The only winning strategy is not to play." And so it is, not only in movies, but also in life, particularly when scrupulosity is work. The only winning strategy is not to play, not to engage the compulsion, not to engage the obsession. Clearly, and with as much certitude as is possible, identify the disorder for what it is and refuse to engage it. Manage it, by all means, using the best practices that you have learned that are effective for you. But do not engage it. And most certainly, do not believe the lies that it generates about you. The lies it generates about your relationship with God, or the lies that it tells you about your final destination and eternity. I hope these few words with you have been helpful. If you would like to read more about it, it's in the Scrupulous Anonymous edition, August 2025, entitled, "It is a Disorder." Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you the next time.